Hey, good morning, Central. It's Andy here this morning. I want to thank you for tuning in or wherever you're watching this, if it's the morning or the afternoon. I want to share a passage of Scripture, a couple actually, starting in Daniel chapter 10, if you'd like to open up there. And really, I'd like you to read these words with me. Um, Daniel chapter 10 is a strange passage. We'll get to that here in a moment. But I got to tell you, because I got to tell you why I'm sharing this passage today and what led me to think about this text over this last week. Mallory and I have very near and dear friends of us, Luke and Jenna. Jenna was Mallory's roommate, her only roommate when she was in college before we got married. Luke, great friend of mine. Uh, really, we enjoy conversations about theology, about the church, about growing closer to Christ, and we were able to have great conversations. But they're on their way long term to live in Japan. They're fully funded. They're on their way now, and they were supposed to leave at the end of January. That's when their visas were signed. They had all the paperwork, even for their dog that's going with them, and all of that was up and ready for them to go at the end of January. But then Japan decided to close their borders. So instead of moving to Japan, Luke and Jenna are stuck, at least for a month and a half, in the States, basically without a place to stay right now, with a lot of unanswered questions and all this anticipation about going and being able to help start this church in this massive city in Japan. It's all on pause. And they're just waiting and waiting. And we were discussing this a couple nights ago because they actually ended up staying with us for 2 nights because they lost the place they were staying at. And we were discussing, why does God make us wait? And more generally speaking, and we'll get to this here in a minute, what's God doing when He makes us have bitter moments like that? I want to turn your attention now to this passage in Daniel. Daniel has been praying. He's been distraught for a long time. Daniel chapter 10, verse 3 kind of describes some of this. I did not eat any tasty food, nor did meat or wine enter my mouth, nor did any anointment at all until for the entire 3 weeks. He's in bitter mourning. At least that's how he goes on to describe himself. And he's prayed and he's asked God, and he doesn't know why God's not doing anything yet. Now, fast forward, go all the way down to verse 10. This angel, who's an answer to his prayer, speaks to him. Then behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling to my hands and my knees. He said to me, O Daniel, man of high esteem, understand the words that I am about to tell you, and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. And then he said to me, do not be afraid, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart on understanding this and humbling yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I have been left there with the kings of Persia. Crazy passage. Lots of stuff that happens in Daniel is quite honestly just not only fascinating and cool, but it's strange and sometimes hard to wrap your mind around. Here's this angel who's been sent, and something, the prince of Persia, which is probably a reference to a demon in this text, is stopping him for 21 days. That's what happens in this little battle. But why would God make Daniel wait? See, being delayed, waiting, having to go through something better, it doesn't necessarily mean that God hasn't sent something. And it doesn't mean that God couldn't have instantly been present there, instantly had angels. For some reason, I'm led to believe it was for Daniel's benefit that he had to wait. As I was discussing this with these missionaries, of course, they don't even like being called that. They just prefer Christians who are moving to Japan, which I appreciate. But as I was discussing it with these near and dear friends of ours, one of the things that we talked about was that God sometimes allows us to suffer for our own benefit, forcing us to wait, forcing us to go through this whole last year and whatever this coming year brings us. But with that, it doesn't mean that God is not doing something. It doesn't mean God is not actively involved, as with Daniel's story and with ours. So 2 quick examples on this as we start our day. This first one comes from a passage in Isaiah chapter 38, verse 17, if you're curious. This is what he says. It was for my own benefit that I was given great bitterness. It is you who has kept my soul from the pit of nothingness, for you have cast all my sins behind your back. These phrases come up in the prophets, they come up in the Psalms, like Psalm 119, verse 75, that it was in your faithfulness you have afflicted me. These passages occur all throughout the Old Testament, that sometimes God gives us bitterness. He makes us wait 21 days in mourning and in a sort of fast like Daniel did. But it was ultimately always for the benefit of the righteous. Or to use the expression in the New Testament, working all things in conformity with his will, for the good of those who love him. That's Ephesians 1 and Romans 8. Bitterness, waiting, sitting around and mourning, feeling distraught, asking, Lord, it's been 21 days. It's been a great deal of time. It may even feel and may have actually been longer than that, and feeling distant. But it was always God involved. As we read in Psalm 119, or as I quoted at least in verse 75, explicitly saying that in your faithfulness you have afflicted me. Sometimes the best thing that God can do for us is, even though he can send help that can be there instantly, is to let us sit there and mourn, to learn something. This was certainly the message of Corinthians in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, and I'm just going to share this very quickly. We do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our affliction has come to us in Asia, that we were burdened excessively beyond our strength, so that we despaired of even death itself. Indeed, we had the sentence of death within ourselves. But this happened so that we would not trust in ourselves, but in God. Here's what I want to leave you with, and really the only thing that I hope that I can get across this morning. God frequently gives us bitter times in life. He frequently allows us to go through distress in his faithfulness. For Paul, that taught him to learn to rely on God instead of himself. So here's what I want us to discuss and to think about and to pray about today. Lord, what are you trying to teach me? What are you trying to teach us? And how should we respond to this moment? That is our prayer this morning. May the Lord protect you, and may we seek after the wisdom that comes in mourning and in bitterness from our faithful God.